When most people think of the origins of heavy metal, they point straight to Black Sabbath's first album, released in February 1970. Others go even further back, citing Blue Cheer's 1968 debut as the true beginning of the genre. But the reality is more complex and far more layered. Of course, bands like Cream, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience played a major role in shaping heavy metal. But to make things more interesting, this video will focus on names that are not as obvious, bands that aren't as frequently mentioned when the topic of proto-metal comes up. All the songs featured on the video predate Black Sabbath's first album, and some of them even predate Blue Cheer's debut. So without further ado, here are 10 proto-metal gems from Britain in the late 60s. Let's begin. Futilist's Lament by High Tide is quite possibly the heaviest British song of the late 60s. The track was featured on the band's debut album, released in June 1969, 7 months before Black Sabbath's first LP, and it delivered a kind of heaviness that was rare for the era. High Tide was founded by violinist Simon House and guitarist Tony Hill, who had previously been a member of The Misunderstood, another excellent group who released a couple of truly groundbreaking singles in 1966. High Tide stood out for the intense interplay between Tony Hill's searing guitar riffs and Simon House's electric violin, which wasn't used for pastoral flourishes, but as a weapon of distortion and aggression. The result was a sound unlike anything else in 1969, dense, crushing, and laced with a doomy atmosphere both musically and lyrically.
Kill your dreams of darkness now, turn around, see me crying.
Futilist's Lament stands as a defining moment in British rock's move towards heavy metal, a sound that anticipated the dark and doomy style that Sabbath would soon unleash. Later in the 70s, Simon House joined Hawkwind and also collaborated with David Bowie. The Blossom Toes are not usually remembered as a heavy band, but just like the previous song by High Tide, this track is one of the heaviest tunes from the late 60s.
Take this bomb, drop it on old Hong Kong. Whoa, no, you ain't gonna give me things like that.
The song was featured on the group's second album, released in July 1969. And it combines heavy riffs with a wild and unhinged vocal delivery that seems to anticipate the vocal styles of some of the more extreme forms of metal that would emerge a couple of decades later.
No, you ain't gonna get me.
The Blossom Toes began as a psychedelic band in 1966, and their debut album, released in late 1967, remains one of the greatest and most underrated British psychedelic records of that period. But by 1968, Psychedelia was starting to lose momentum, and just like many of their contemporaries, the band began shifting towards a heavier sound. The group still embraced psychedelic experimentation, but instead of evoking the colorful, whimsical feel of a good acid trip, their experimentation had taken a darker turn, at times resembling a bad acid trip laced with doomy paranoia. Their second album blends psychedelic influences with a noticeably heavier approach, with the track Peace Loving Man standing out as the heaviest song on the record and the heaviest track they ever recorded. Just like the previously mentioned High Tide, the album found a dedicated underground following, but unfortunately, it received mostly mixed reviews from the press, who at the time often dismissed heavy music as monotonous and lacking interest. This track by a group called Sands is striking for its heavy and doomy sound, and it's even more remarkable when you realize that the track was released in 1967, a full 3 years before Black Sabbath's debut album and even a year before Blue Cheer's first record. Listen to the Sky was released as a B-side in September 1967, and it starts out as a fairly typical psychedelic pop song from that period. But suddenly, the sound of air raid sirens start dominating the song. and a completely out-of-control fuzz guitar gives way to a doom-laden coda that clearly foreshadows the sound that Black Sabbath would unleash 3 years later. The coda was based on Mars the Bringer of War, a Gustav Holst composition that Black Sabbath themselves later acknowledged as a huge influence on their music.
I was a medium-sized fan of Holst, the Planet Suite, particularly Mars in those days. And one of the days I was we were rehearsing and I was trying to play Mars. And then the next day, Tony went in and went, and that's the way how Black Sabbath came about.
Sands had been discovered by Beatles manager Brian Epstein, who signed them to his NEMS management company. The single came out on Reaction Records, a label run by Robert Stigwood, who had recently partnered with Brian Epstein, and it was even published by the Beatles' Apple Publishing Company. Unfortunately, its release coincided with Brian Epstein's sudden death in August 1967. And with no one left at NEMS or Reaction to promote the single or secure live bookings, the record quickly fell through the cracks, and the band broke up shortly afterwards. When asked about the song several years later, Sands guitarist Rob Freeman said,
"It's pretty much what we used to do on stage, complete with smoke bombs, flash powder, taped sound effects, and controlled guitar and bass feedback. I don't know if it expanded anyone's psyche, but it was our mandatory anti-war statement, and it scared the girls shitless."
Released in October 1968, Race with the Devil by Gun is one of the most undeniable proto-metal moments of the late 60s. The track showcased many of the genre's essential ingredients, a powerful heavy riff, pounding drums, and an aggressive vocal delivery that gave the whole thing a sense of urgency and menace. The fast chugging rhythm of the song would echo in the music of bands like Judas Priest and Motorhead years later. And it's a good example of this transition period when the raw energy of psychedelic rock gave way to a darker and more aggressive approach that pointed the way towards heavy metal. The song, which was also featured on the group's debut album, was a surprise hit, reaching number 8 and remaining in the top 40 for 10 weeks. A couple of years later in 1970, Jimi Hendrix famously quoted the riff during a live performance of Machine Gun, and the track was later covered by a number of hard rock and heavy metal bands like Judas Priest and Girl School, cementing its place in the proto-metal canon. With its skull-crushing riff and relentless double-kick drumming, Magic Potion by the Open Mind is another prime example of how the roots of heavy metal can be traced back to psychedelia. It's a fascinating blend of psychedelic melodies with a raw and aggressive heaviness that hints at the sounds that metal would later embrace.
Take a drink from my magic potion. Tell me, do you still feel fine?
The track also highlights how British and American bands were evolving on parallel lines. The central riff bears a striking resemblance to I Wanna Be Your Dog by the Stooges. But despite the similarity, both songs were released within a month of each other. While the Stooges' debut landed in April 1969, Magic Potion was featured on the Open Mind's self-titled debut album in July, though it had been recorded months earlier. The resemblance is purely coincidental, showing how the same gritty, stripped-down energy was starting to bubble up on both sides of the Atlantic. Lyrically, Magic Potion is an unabashed ode to LSD, and while the single wasn't a commercial success, it has since become a cult favorite. The group's only LP has grown into a highly sought-after collector's item, valued by both fans of psychedelia and proto-metal. With its snarling, powerful riff and aggressive delivery, Love in the Rain is one of the heaviest tracks on Edgar Bront and Band's debut album, released in 1969. It's a raw and unpolished piece of heavy psychedelia that clearly leans into proto-metal territory. and it's another great example of how the roots of heavy metal were already forming beneath the surface of the psychedelic underground. The track blends primal, fuzzed-out guitar work with a loose and unhinged vocal performance, giving it a wild energy and confrontational tone. When the blues-based foundations of rock were mutating into something darker, louder, and more chaotic. And Love in the Rain wasn't the album's only moment of heaviness. Several other tracks on the record also pushed into similarly aggressive territory.
Thought I heard a raindrop fall. It trickled down, did it? Watch your body with better life, it's all in the sky. Evil, evil, all black as night.
Even though they never found mainstream success, the Edgar Bront band had a strong following on the London underground scene. Alongside the other bands featured in this video, it reflects the shifting landscape of British rock at the end of the 60s, a time when things were getting louder, heavier, and more intense by the minute.
Everyone is saying what to do and what to think. When to ask permission when you really want to blink.
Rory Gallagher got his start in music as the leader of Taste, and this track called Blister on the Moon is a ferocious proto-metal classic that stands out for its raw, riff-driven energy. The song was released as a single in April 1968, making its heavy sound all the more remarkable given its early place in the heavy rock timeline. Lyrically, it explores themes of personal defiance and societal alienation, common threads in heavy metal across the decades.
Now what we say is best. Little man, you're no better than the rest.
Just like most of the previously featured songs, the single was not a commercial success. But Blister on the Moon remains a significant piece in the evolution of British heavy rock, a vivid example of how the genre's roots were already taking shape well before the 70s. The song was later re-recorded in 1969 and featured on the group's first LP.
You taste the tender fruits of her love.
This track is yet another searing example of how the late 60s psychedelic underground was already laying the groundwork for heavy metal. Pulled from their 1969 self-titled debut album, the track combines heavy riffs with raw, aggressive energy, most notably in its ferocious lead guitar work. The trio, which was fronted by Peter Illingworth on guitar and vocals, leaned hard into fuzz-drenched riffing and powerful rhythmic drive. On Dream, Illingworth delivers biting, distorted leads that cut through the mix with a force rarely heard at the time, channeling a kind of proto-metal intensity that sets the track apart from many rock bands from the period. Like other tracks in this video, Dream captures a key turning point when psychedelia and blues-based rock were mutating into something heavier, darker, and more visceral, pointing straight towards the birth of metal. This track, called Rhubarb by a band called The Second Hand, was featured on the group's debut album, released in 1968. The record is widely regarded as one of the first progressive rock recordings, and this track perfectly showcases their powerful fusion of heavy psychedelia and early progressive rock. The track reflects the experimental spirit of the late 60s British underground. While not as riff-heavy as some other proto-metal classics, Rhubarb stands out for its complexity and mood, hinting at the evolving boundaries between psychedelia and heavier forms. Just like many of the albums mentioned in this video, Second Hand's debut LP has become a highly prized collector's item and stands as a fascinating snapshot of an era when the boundaries between psychedelia, progressive rock, and heavy music were blurred and intertwined. Too Old by Andromeda is a standout track from the band's 1969 self-titled debut album, widely regarded as a cornerstone of British heavy psychedelia and proto-progressive rock. Featuring John Ducan on guitar and vocals, who would later gain fame with Atomic Rooster, the song blends heavy psychedelic textures with early progressive rock, pushing the boundaries of late 60s British underground music.
Too old is all you hear. Too old to be sincere.
Andromeda never achieved significant commercial success, but the group enjoyed the support of DJ John Peel, who regularly played them on his radio show. And among the band's admirers was Pete Townshend of The who even expressed interest in producing their debut album, although that collaboration never materialized.
Time to think about the time when you were old, and to think about the times that you were told of what to do.
Despite its innovative approach, the album did not achieve commercial success, partly due to limited promotion. But the record is now regarded as a cult classic, showcasing how bands from that period were exploring new territories between psychedelic sounds and the nascent heavy metal movement. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to share your favorite tracks from the list in the comments, or let me know which ones surprised you the most. See you next time.